Okay, so what we've seen until now is that we know that from the Gemara in Sukkah that Chazal during the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, when there were large assemblies of men and women gathering together in the Beis HaMikdash, they made a tikkun gadol, they made a great remedy or rectification in the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, and that remedy was to build a balcony so that there would be no intermingling of the genders in the Beis HaMikdash. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his tshuva about the laws of Mechitzah that we saw last time, was able to infer that this must have been a din deoraisa. This must have been a biblical law, because otherwise you can't change the structure of the Beis HaMikdash willy-nilly, just on your own discretion. They must have been able, and the Gemara implies this, that they found a pasuk that enabled them to do that. So this requirement, and Rav Moshe went so far as to say that the requirement of a mechitzah in all batei knesses, which is a facsimile of the Beis HaMikdash, is a din deoraisa. That during tefillah in a Beis HaKnesses, you need to separate the men and the women with a mechitzah. The other thing that we saw, and by the way, the big machlokas between Rav Moshe and the Satmar Rav was what kind of mechitzah must it be. Rav Moshe said that the mechitzah only has to be something that prevents kalus rosh, but does not prevent histaklus. It prevents frivolity of intermingling, but does not necessarily have to prevent visibility. So therefore, according to Rav Moshe, you can have a women's balcony where the women are still visible, and he infers that from the fact that in the Beis HaMikdash, the men who were standing on the ground floor could see the women in the balcony. They were in clear view of the men that were in the center. And hence you have many Batei Knesses, including ours, that have a balcony where there's still visibility, or at least partial visibility, of the women. Now, and he says, if you're not going to have a balcony, you can have, for whatever logistical reasons, it's not practical to build a balcony in your shul. All you need is a mechitzah that goes up to shoulder height, and it's okay if you see the women's faces, because as long as there's not going to be any socializing, that's the issue that we're concerned about. The Satmar Rav was vehemently opposed to Rav Moshe's tshuva and wrote a very, very sharp critique of it in a very lengthy tshuva in the Shilas Tshuva's Divrei Yoel, which we're not going to look into now, but it is important to know that there is an opposing shita, and the Satmar Rav felt that a mechitzah not only has to prevent social interaction, but it also has to prevent histaklus. For the very simple reason is that visibility will lead to hirhur, will lead to thoughts, right? Sinful thoughts, potentially, by seeing a woman's face during tefillah, in the Beis HaKnesses. And that in itself is kalus rosh. That in itself is a form of frivolity or frivolous thinking. That's the Satmar Rav Shita. By and large, most Batei Knesses that I guess we would circulate in, for lack of a better term, like an OU kind of shul, rule like Rav Moshe, but there are many Batei Knesses which are machmir in this regard, like the Satmar Rav. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, right? In other words, there's validity to both shitas. Another thing that we saw last week is from the Sefer Chasidim, and he said, really, before that, we get to the Shulchan Aruch, based on the Gemara talking about not intermingling, in the Beis HaMikdash, the Shulchan Aruch rules that the Beis Din over the Yomim Tovim has to set up enforcers, sort of police, to make sure that men and women are not socializing in parks and in public works because of the kalus rosh that sometimes happens over the Yomim Tovim. And they have to basically break up the social interaction if they see that it's going down a negative path. And it's on that basis that the Sefer Chasidim writes that when you're at a Sheva Brachas and the person leading the benching says Nevarech Elokeinu shahasimcha b'ma'ono, that the simcha is at its proper time and proper framework, he says that you can only say that if the men and women are sitting separately. But if the men and women are, actually he goes even so far to say that, right, if men and women are sitting together, he says you can't say shasimcha bim'ono because there's going to be sinful thoughts taking place. And on that, we had a great qualification of this whole idea of any time that there's a social interaction between men and women, that's going to create sinfulness from the Levush of the 17th century. The Levush writes that that was true at a time when women were quite invisible in the public sphere. But today, he says, in the medieval world, late medieval period, when it's quite common to see women on the street, this idea of having women present in social settings is really not as much of a consideration as it was in prior generations. Because there's nothing provocative about seeing a woman in a social setting, in a public setting. It used to be that women were, when they were largely absent from public settings, if all of a sudden you come to a public gathering and you see a woman, this is something provocative because, hey, how often do I get to see women other than my wife in social settings? And that's why the Chachamim of prior generations were so stringent about creating separations. But in a culture, in a society, where it's quite common at the workplace and on the street and in the places of transportation where you go, there are women, it's ubiquitous. So therefore, the restrictions of having men and women together in social settings is not as great. Now, of course, this is not addressing the law of mechitzah in a Beis HaKnesses. This is addressing the law of having a mechitzah or separation in social settings outside the Beis HaKnesses. So that's what we had seen up until now. And now we're ready to take it a little bit further. Okay? So, because there's really no clear psak that we've seen yet as far as separate seating at social events, at a shir, let's say, at a wedding, let's say, and so forth. So,
when you're distinguishing inside and outside of Beit Knesset, you're not just talking just about the main sanctuary where you're playing. You're talking about the Beit Knesset in general.
Talking about the Beit HaKnesset, talking about a place of prayer, a place of prayer that is designated for that prayer space. So anyway, so let's go a little bit further. We're up to now source 11 in our handout. The previous source that we had seen was the tshuva of Rav Moshe about the laws of mechitzah in a Beis HaKnesses. But his next tshuva, which is written just a few years after the other tshuva, was be'inyan ha-mechitza bein anashim l'nashim, regarding a mechitza between men and women, and he continues the discussion of a mechitza in a Beis HaKnesses. But towards the end of that tshuva, he writes as follows: Uvemakom kibutz ledivrei harishus va'af b'chasunos. He says, now what about public gatherings that are not in a Beis HaKnesses? And what about weddings? Misufkani im yesha isr zeh ba'ofan shalekach shash yichud. He says, I am in doubt as to whether there's a prohibition of intermingling of the genders like we have in a Beis HaKnesses. Im yesha isr zeh ba'ofan shalekach shash yichud, where there's no fear of yichud. In other words, you have a whole bunch of men and a whole bunch of women. Is there a problem or not of social interaction? V'yoser nota shaleka le'isr zeh, and it would seem to me, I'm leaning towards saying that there is no isr of an intermingling. Why? He says, Daha ashkachan ba'achilas ha'pesach shahayu ochlin ha'anashim v'hanashim b'vayas echad. Because when it comes to the Korban Pesach, we note that the night of Pesach, men and women used to eat the Korban Pesach in the same place, in the same house. And there was no requirement for a mechitza or a separation of men and women to eat the Korban Pesach in two separate places. V'hayu sham kama mishpachos she'en lecha kol Pesach u'Pesach shelo nimnu alav yoser me'asara ki de'isa b'psachim daf samach daled. The Gemara in Psachim says that typically you'd have 10 people at a time designated to eat the Korban Pesach. Now, not every family had 8 kids, So what did you do? If you were a family of 4 or 5 people, so you'd have 2 families would get together. Sometimes 3 families would get together to have the Korban Pesach, because how are you going to eat a whole sheep, right? So you'd have to have, typically you had 10 people partaking of a Korban Pesach. And he says, "V'medrash Rabba Eicha Isatani Rav Chia Afilu Mem V'Afilu Nun." Sometimes you could have 40 and 50 people partaking of one Korban Pesach according to the Medrash. I guess perhaps because technically all you need to eat is a kazayas, right? So if you have a big sheep, you can get at least 50 kazasim out of a sheep, right? Bar Kapara Omar Afilu Kuf. He says, and Bar Kapara says even 100 people theoretically could eat one sheep, of each person having a kazayas. The Reb Shimon Eina Pesach Nechal B'Shtei Chaburos. He says, Reb Shimon in the Gemara in Maseches Psachim Daf Pei Vav says, there's a Mishnah that says, or actually a Gemara that quotes Reb Shimon that says that the Korban Pesach cannot be eaten by two separate groups, which means that if I have one sheep or one lamb, I cannot divide it into two chaburas. One lamb can only be eaten by one chabura. I can't say, well, you take one half of the lamb and you take the other half and we'll go our separate ways. One lamb can only be eaten by one chabura. So, v'im yasu mechitza beinehem, harei yechashvu kishtei chaburas. And the problem is that don't tell me that they put a mechitza between the men and the women for eating the Korban Pesach, because that would by definition make it two separate chaburas. K'de'isa b'psachim daf peivav, umid Reb Shimon nishma shegam l'Reb Yehuda, av shenechal b'shtei chaburos, and Reb Yehuda, granted Reb Yehuda argues, and he holds that you could split one animal among two chaburas, but nevertheless, lo chivu shahanashim yochlu b'chabura acheres, but even Reb Yehuda doesn't obligate women to eat in a separate chabura. V'gam b'daf tzadi aleph tanan ve'ein osim chaburas nashim v'avodim uketanim. Now, there's also a Mishnah later on in Psachim that says that you're not allowed to make separate chaburas for women and slaves and children. Now, looking at that just in a vacuum, without looking at the Gemara, if you understand that to mean to make a separate chabura of women, the Mishnah says you don't do that, which implies that men and women gather together. And af l'maisha mefarish rava shein osim nashim v'avodim bechabura echas mishum tiflus, mashma shenashim ima nashim yisraelim mutar. And Rava explains the Mishnah slightly differently. Rava says that the Mishnah is not prohibiting a group of women from making a chabura, but it's prohibiting women and male slaves from making one chabura, because slaves are notoriously licentious and lewd. And that's the way he understands it. But you can infer from that if it's males who are not slaves, they can eat it together with women. So you see very clearly that when it comes to a public gathering, let's say to eat the Korban Pesach together, there's no requirement. Even if there's dozens of people there's no requirement to separate the men and the women. Ulamada hayasavar Rabbi Ukva bar Chanina lo avdina lenashim levadan eladavka ima nashim ayin sham. And we won't go into that Gemara now, but he was of the thinking that you have to have men together with women because you don't shech the Korban Pesach for women alone. But the bottom line is that you see very clearly from the Gemara, Chazin and Shagam the Rebbe Yehuda Dairi Alibei Rishon Lechel Bechabur Echas Shehu Below Mechitza. You see very clearly from that Gemara that men and women can eat together without a mechitza. The Gam Hada Hakala Hofeches Paneha Shapirish Rashi Al Masha Omar Rabbi Chia Bar Abba Omar Rabbi Yechanan Mipni Shehi Bosha Le'echol Le'nei Ha'anashim Ayidei Shemistaklin Ba. Later on in that very same Gemara in Daf Pei Vav, the Gemara says that a kala, a new bride, even though she's part of a chabura, can turn her face away from the chabura while she's eating. And why is that? So the Gemara says because it's embarrassing for her to eat with her mouth full in front of other men, because other people are going to be looking at her. So she'ein shayach b'fnei avia ve'acheha ela b'fnei anashim acher. A girl is only going to be embarrassed if she's in front of strange men, not in front of family members. And therefore it's clear once again from this section of the Gemara as well that there's no requirement for a mechitza to separate the men and the women in a social gathering that's not in a shul. But in a Beis HaKnesses, at the time of prayer, it sounds like Rav Moshe is saying that you need both, that it's got to be A, in a Beis HaKnesses, and B, during Tefillah. it's clear that it's an Isser Deoraisa for men and women to be davening in a shul together, without a mechitza, midioraisa. V'tzarch shetiya mechitza shel yud ches tfachim beinehem, o sheyu anoshim l'mayla v'anoshim l'mata kidibiyarti. And therefore you need to have a mechitza of 18 tfachim between them, which again goes up to shoulder height, right? We say it's a 5-foot mechitza is what Rav Moshe said. And that's the halacha for a Beis HaKnesses. We don't need to go to the last paragraph because it's not germane to our discussion now. Okay, any questions so far? Yes, Chaim.
18 tefachim is actually 60.
It depends how you measure a tefach.
Tefach is 4 inches.
That's according to how some measure a tefach. But the bottom line is that Rav Moshe says it only has to go up to shoulder height. If you look at the previous tshuva that we did last week, you'll see, Arak Tafayim, he says, up until the shoulders. That's all you need. Okay?
So how does the Mishnah Brura and come down on that?
Well, if you remember, we saw last week, are you asking about the laws of Mechitza?
Yeah.
Mishnah Brura doesn't discuss Mechitza.
Oh.
There's no sif in Shulchan Aruch that talks about Mechitza in a Beis HaKnesses. There's nothing in the Shulchan Aruch that discusses a Mechitza. It's a very interesting question as to why the Shulchan Aruch doesn't discuss Mechitza. That in itself is a question. Why is there no sif in Shulchan Aruch that talks about Hilchos Mechitza? The simple answer is because the Batei Knesses in general were reserved for use of men. Like we learned from the Levush. Remember, what did the Levush tell us? It was a rarity for women to come out into the public sphere. Right? And because it was such a rarity, there was no need to discuss perhaps the laws of Mechitza. All right? Now, Rav Moshe in 1986, 1986, this must have been right before his Petira, he wrote this tshuva. In source number 12, Im tzarech mechitza b'chasana lahafrid ben gvarim v'nashim. Do you need a mechitza at a wedding to separate between men and women? Do you need to have a mechitza? We know that, we learned that according to the Sefer Chasidim, you would need to not only have a mechitza, but have men in separate and women in separate rooms in order to be able to say Sha'asimcha b'ma'ona. But Rav Moshe's question is, assuming that they're in the same room, do you have to have a mechitza? Uvekesher lehitzdarchut lemechitza b'chasana, yadua shehizbarti b'sifri igros Moshe Orach Chaim, chelak aleph simin mem aleph, and also before in the other simanim, shahachiyuv lemechitza yeshrak ledavar shepatuach lerabim, v'chasana nechshav kidavar prati. So Rav Moshe adds another aspect to this halacha. Rav Moshe says, as I've written before, you only need a mechitza in a public gathering if it's truly a public gathering. In other words, if something is meant for the public participation, you may not need a mechitza de oraisa, but at least de rabbanan you should have a mechitza for tznius, for modesty, to prevent kalus rosh. But a wedding is not considered to be a public gathering. Why is a wedding not a public gathering? Because it's by invitation only. And since it's by invitation only, and you get to choose the guests, not everyone can just pop in off the street. Therefore, it does not require a mechitza. Okay?
What about chuppah? Chuppah people do.
Okay, we're going to get to chuppah soon. Now, by the way, even a chuppah, it's by invitation only. You can't people do crash. People do crash. But it's still by invitation only. There's no public announcement that says everyone can come to my chuppah. Usually that's not the case. So Rav Moshe felt that there's such a distinction. When you're announcing, let's say, a public shir or a public gathering, what else? What other kind of public gathering would there be besides a shir? A concert, a hesped, perhaps. So then you should have a mechitza, you should have at least for sure separate seating. But when it's a private gathering, by invitation only, Rav Moshe feels that you don't have to have a mechitza. He doesn't address whether the seating should be separate or mixed. That he doesn't address. Next, source number 13.
What part of the chassan is he discussing?
The reception, presumably. He doesn't say specifically.
So he would say that it's usher to go to a concert.
Would he say it's usher to go to a concert?
Place,
I don't know.
no mechitza.
It depends.
Roy Thompson Hall.
I don't know. I don't know what he would say. I don't know. It could be that the argument might be that since you're going to meet with a bunch of strangers, this is not a gathering where people are going to socialize. I mean, I could argue that when you go to a concert, you don't know anybody. All you know is the person that you go to the concert with. So it could be that there's bichlal no isser, if Moshe would hold that there's only a problem if there's a possibility of kalos rosh. But by going to a concert where you know nobody, and you keep to yourself and your date or whoever you're going with, it could be that even that since there's not the liability of kalos rosh, maybe that would be okay. I don't know. Dvarim atzrichim mechitza lahafrid bein anashim lenashim dvarim sheinam tzrichim mechitza. This was a tshuva that Rav Moshe wrote in 1982, and this is in this was Siman Yud Beis that he made reference to before, and he writes this to Rabbi Yaakov Elephant, and he writes as follows: Hine dibarti im krovecha odos in yanei hahalacha shechaverei beis knesset shelcha behaskamas Rav Hir bikshu shetishal etzli. I understand that your Kehillah has asked you to ask me the following questions. Umishum shemachmas tirdosai hamarubos kasha lefanai lichtov ba'arichus lachein ashiv b'kitzur al pi seder hashelo shekasaf. It's a little bit difficult for me because of all of the distractions that I have right now, but I'll write for you a response to the three questions that you asked regarding mechitza b'kitzur, in brief. So the first question is, Aleph, Mechitza kishemispalim b'makom she'eno kavua l'tefila. What if you're davening in a place which is not designated as a synagogue, as a regular place of davening? Do you need to have a mechitza then? Let's say you want to make an ad hoc minyan in your house. You're making a barbecue and you want to make a minyan. So do you need a mechitza if there are women present? Okay? So sha'altem tzarach mechitza kishemispalim b'makom she'eno kavua l'tefila l'mashal beveis evil rachmana litzlan. Another example would be in a shiva house. Do you need to have a mechitza? Im tzrichos hanashim leilech lecheder nifrad o shadai behefsek avir. And do the women have to go to a separate room or not? Just perhaps maybe having them just separate. Women in one side of the room, men on the other side of the room. What's the deal? It would seem to me, says Rav Moshe, that al pi halacha the women do have to go to a separate room. V'hatam debeis evel havi makom shepasuach l'rabim shetzarich bo midina tamid hafrada ben hanashim la'anashim. The kol shekain bishas tefila. He says it would seem to me that a beis evel is a public space, and as a public space, it requires separate seating because it's open to the public. We don't restrict who comes to the Beis Eva like we do by a chasana. It's my invitation only. So therefore, you need to have a separation between men and women, and surely this is true at the time of davening. Kimavur b'tshuvasi, ba'egros Moshe, or Chaim, Chelak Aleph, etc. Aval im l'maisa hanashim einon maskimos la'azov es hacheder. But let's say the women refused to leave the room. See, Rav Moshe was very practical. He knew that in certain situations, if there would be someone who would say, okay, everybody, we're davening mincha, and the women are there, some of the women are not going to be fully compliant with the desire to leave the room. Or maybe it's not practical for them to leave the room because it's a tremendous inconvenience. So he says, nechshav zela akroi, so this is considered to be a temporary, non-fixed situation of men and women davening together, and therefore, even though normally for public gatherings you need to have a separation, especially during tefillah, but since this is akroi, this is just like a one-off situation, you don't have to refrain from davening for that reason. Avol bebeis chasen midina ein tzarech b'mechitza she'eno pasuach l'rabim ela rak livnei hamishpacha. But at a reception, at a wedding reception, that's what really beis chasen means, mi'ikar hadin you don't need a mechitza, because it's not open to the public. It's only for the members of the family, which is really, members of my closest friends and family could be sometimes 800 people. But nevertheless, it's by invitation only. And therefore, let's say I'm at a wedding reception, and there is only one room for the reception, and there's men and women filling that room, there's no mechitza. Do I need to worry about the fact that I'm davening in a corner next to a table where there are women seated? So Rav Moshe says no, it's not a problem, because that's not a public gathering. And in a non-public gathering, you don't need to have a separation between men and women for the purposes of tefillah, but you do need to have a place where you can go and have kavanah. So therefore, go find a corner, daven there, but don't worry if the women are right nearby, because that's not a consideration. Next, Beis. Im tzarech mechitza lachutz rak b'fnei ma'at nashim. So just to clarify what we have so far, is that Rav Moshe says, in a Beis HaKnesses, during tefillah, unquestionably you need a mechitza, a kosher mechitza, and that's a din d'oraisa. When you're not in a Beis HaKnesses setting, you need to have a mechitza, but only if it's for a gathering that's open to the public. And it sounds like from Rav Moshe that this mechitza should be present even if it's not for tefillah. It sounds like from Rav Moshe that even when you're not davening, the most appropriate thing is to have a mechitza between men and women in any social gathering that's open to the public. If it's not open to the public, but it's by invitation only, so then you don't have to worry about a mechitza, and it's unclear from Rav Moshe whether even separate seating is necessary or not. Now, one could potentially argue that a shir could be, it's a little bit ambiguous. Is that open to the public, or is it by invitation only, because the members are the ones... What?
Only if I send them an email.
Only if you send it out. If you post it on Facebook, it sounds like to me that it's open to the public. Mistama. Or if you put up a sign. What?
I think it's minyan at an airport. That's public as you can get.
Minyan at an airport is public, but at the same time, it could be that it's derech akroy, like Rav Moshe writes. There's no reason. In other words, lechatchila Rav Moshe says you should have a mechitza if you can get it, or at least have the women daven in a separate room. But if they're not willing to leave, don't worry about it, because it's derech akroy, and derech akroy is okay. It's a happenstance kind of situation.
It sounds like he's more worried about the private versus public function rather than tefillah versus non-tefillah.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe this is not for this discussion, but would Moshe's whole sock change if you're dealing with women who don't have their hair covered?
He does say in the tshuva regarding mechitza that it is important to make sure that the women dress in a tznius fashion. It's a problem if women are dressed in a non-tznius fashion, even if you have a mechitza, but the women are visible, right, and they're not dressed properly, how can you say a bracha in their presence?
Right.
So that's another issue. I didn't bring that portion, but you're right. In tzarech mechitza lachutz rak bifnei ma'at nashim. The next part of his tshuva is, the next shaila was, what if I'm in a Beis HaKnesses, but only a small number of women want to come in and listen to Kaddish or say Kaddish? Do I need a mechitza? Or is a mechitza only when there's a bunch of women? So sha'alta im tzarech mechitza lachatzotz rak bifnei isha echas o shtayim. Do you need a mechitza even if there's just one or two women? So shehinei be'igros Moshe chelak aleph or achaim siman lamates besofo hevesi raya mikidushin and beis amid beis Tosfos she'ein chiyav mechitza lahafsik lifnei kama nashim bilvad. I brought a raya from Tosfos that there's not an obligation to have a mechitza if there's just a small number of women. V'tzarich leva'er ad kama nashim ein tzarich mechitza. So we would have to really go into, try to explain, we have to quantify how many women do you need a mechitza for, and how many women is too small that you don't need a mechitza. Kigon beveis evel, or beveis medrash, mispalim sham b'yimei hachol, v'mincha b'shabbos, shein sham mechitza, ha'imuter lahaniach shekama nashim yikansu v'yeshvu b'sof ha'cheder. So for example, if you're in a shiva house, or in a beis medrash where they daven like a weekday chapel, or a place where they go for mincha on Shabbos, where there's no mechitza there, right? Let's say, so would it be okay for the one or two straggler women who want to daven during the week to come there and daven without a mechitza? That's the question. And by the way, a lot of Batei Knesses have their weekday chapel without a mechitza. It's not an unusual thing. So what if a woman wants to come in? Do we have to sort of run to Home Depot and build a mechitza for her on the spot, or schlep in those heavy, partitions for that one woman? Or is it okay if let's sit in the back and don't worry about it? So what is the din?
This room itself, I mean, when there's one straggler woman who's saying Kaddish for the year for the 7:30 minyan, and she stands behind that, I mean...
Well, that in itself is a mechitza. But theoretically, the question is... That's the question. Is it required or not?
Or is this question only outside of it? Because this is now based on this kavua. So this whole question doesn't...
No, but he's also talking about a beis knesses kavua. Beis medrash shemispalalim sham b'mei hachol v'mincha b'Shabbos. That's also part of the question.
Everything.
Yeah.
So this would be our...
Even in a beis knesses, he's asking this question. V'hinei b'chol hadoros nahagu shelifa'amim haisa nichneses isha aniya lebeis hamedrash lekabel tzedakah o avela loymar kaddish. He says, in all generations, you had this issue. Either a woman would come in asking for tzedakah, or one woman would come in wanting to say kaddish. V'hahalacha l'maisa be'inyan zeh tzricha iyun utuluya bahar be'inyanim. And he says, halacha l'maisa, this requires a lot of focus, and it really depends on a lot of different factors. Umikol makom nira shebeveis medrash shebechol Shabbos tirtza afilu isha echas lavo lemincha b'kevius she'ein la hakel lihispala below mechitza v'rak ba'akroi efshar lahatir. So Rav Moshe says, I guess that his dividing line is whether it's habitual or whether it's a one-off, something that's not done with regularity. If it's done regularly, this woman comes either every day or every week and she wants to come and daven with us, so then we should set up a mechitza. If it's just like once in a blue moon, you have a woman who wants to come in, you can be mekel, he says. Ve'ef shalahatir ba'akroi rak ad beis nashim v'lo yoser, but only up to 2 women, but not more. If you get more than 2 women, so then you got to put up the mechitza, even if it's in a happenstance fashion. V'hinei yesh raya ke'in shehizkarta sheladina ef shalahaniach liisha echas liichanes lebeis hamedrash. Min hadin b'shulchan aruch arachaim sim reish pei beis sif gimel diisha ola leminyan shiva kruim. He says you brought a good raya from that a woman can be allowed to enter the Beis HaKnesses in a happenstance fashion, from the fact that the Gemara says that a woman could get an aliyah. Technically, you're allowed to call up a woman as one of the 7 aliyahs on Shabbos. Please don't share this with the public. We don't want to get into trouble, right? But the Gemara says, I say that in jest. The Gemara does say that a woman is ola l'minyan shiva. She's allowed to be one of the 7 aliyahs called up on Shabbos. But the Gemara says we don't do it mipnei kavod hatzibur. We don't do it because out of respect to the tzibur. I gave a whole shir a few years ago on what kavod hatzibur actually means, which we're not going to go into now. But the point is, Rav Moshe says you brought a good raya. The fact that we see that the Gemara is not concerned that a woman should enter into the Beis HaKnesses filled with men to get her aliyah shows us that technically it's permitted. Technically it's permitted. Okay, question number 3. Gimel, im mutter leisha lahagid shir beveis haknesses. Can a woman give a shir in the shul? In other words, what if I were to tell you that the new policy at the bayit is going to be that after davening we're going to let a woman go up and give the drasha? Right? We have a special speaker. And the woman, now up until now, our policy has always been that when we have a female speaker, we go to a different room. And the question is, so like why? Why is that? part of it has to do with the legacy of the sort of trying to remain faithful to the minhagim of the makom. But let's take a look at what Rav Moshe says as far as a woman. What?
The mechanics, before we just look inside, I mean, there's still the mechitzah. Just all that's changed is the speaker.
Yeah, so you're having a woman come in. She's coming in into the men's section, and
That's over there, but let's say she were to stand, I mean, you still have the mechanics of the, no, you're saying because she's in the men's section?
Yeah, not only she's in the men's section, she's standing in front of men, and do we have to worry about hirhur? Do we have to worry about kalos rosh? What are the issues? So that's really the question. Can a woman get up in front of men and give a shir? That's the question. So let's see what he says. Maybe there's no problem. Okay, let's see what he says. Sha'alta im mutar lahaniach liisha lahagid shir beveis knesses o beveis medrash shelo b'shas hatfilah. Davening is over. It's not during davening. We want to hear a lecture from a very prominent woman, Nechama Leibovitz. Aleha Shalom is coming to town, and she's going to be giving a lecture. We want to invite her to the bayit and have her speak from the dais in the shul. Is there a problem with that or not? Kagon shebalel Shabbos nog she'iza balabayis no sein shir beveis hamedrash b'parshas hashavua uboim lishmoa anashim v'nashim imuteres isha litein ashir. Let's say we have a dvar Torah between Mincha and Ma'ariv on Kabbalah Shabbos in the Beis Medrash, and usually it's a rotation of different balabatim who give the dvar Torah. So can and men and women come to the minyan. So is it okay one Shabbos for a woman to give the dvar Torah? Okay, so v'nira she'etzem ma sheyoshvim hashomim b'ta'aruvos hu chisaron gadol. He says, first of all, I want you to know that going to a shir where men and women are sitting together is what he calls a chisaron gadol. It's a big deficiency. Avoloi kanes ladun benidon zelamaisa. But I will not enter into a discussion of that halacha lamaisa at this time. I'm not aware that Rav Moshe ever discussed this issue, but clearly he's unhappy with it. Whether or not he would go so far as asering it doesn't seem like, but he expresses his displeasure with a shir that's mixed. Even though maisim b'chol yom in most communities, this is something that's considered acceptable. Some communities yes, some communities not, but certainly Rav Moshe is displeased with it. Ve'etzem hagadas hashir al yedei isha mutar imhu ba'akra'i bilvad. As far as a woman giving a shir, totally okay, as long as it's a one-off, it's not with regularity. She's not the regular magid shir. V'tzarech lahazira she'teishev bedavka be'es amiras hashir shehiyeh ba'ofan sanua yoter. But you have to tell her that she should sit during the giving of the shir so that it's done in a tzanua fashion. And furthermore, I am against letting her do it inside the shul. She should do it in a private house or in a private house, which is where a woman should give a shir. Now he doesn't say his reasons why, but Rav Moshe is machmir. I heard that Rav Moshe also says, as long as it's b'derech tzanua, it's okay. So having her stand behind the lectern is also b'derech tzanua. And that's what we do. Once in a while we do it b'derech akroy. It's not b'derech keva. But once in a while at shalosh shudas, we will permit a female to speak at shalosh shudas. And we have her speak from a lectern. And it's not in a Beis HaKnesses, it's in the social hall, it's in the Rebbitzin Taub hall, and therefore it certainly conforms to the requirements of Rav Moshe.
What is the derech hakroy to you? I mean, what does it accomplish by it? If it's a derech hakroy, it's okay, but if it's regular, it's not. I mean, what?
So I suppose that the issue is that if it's a b'derech keva, that you have this woman in front of men, Rav Moshe takes objection to it because that creates an excessive intermingling, and it may cause kalos rosh. I don't know. I guess maybe that's the concern. If it's b'derech keva, So I'm not sure whether this enters into the discussion. But what about having a rabbinic staff person in an Orthodox shul who's female? who gives the drasha with regularity. That I think Rav Moshe, I mean, certainly based on this, I don't think that he would be too happy with it.
He uses the word Beit HaKnesset. He doesn't mean the building. He means the place where you're
The place where you're davening, correct. Rav Menashe Klein Zatzal talks about what Eddie was asking about, which was the chuppah. Source number 14. Anoshim enoshim yachad tachas hachuppah al mesamchu. What do men and women rely on, even in very, very frum weddings, especially like in Eretz Yisrael where they do the chuppah out in the street? You've been to an Israeli chuppah, I assume, right? And you go, they do it out in the street or out in the courtyard, and everyone's be'ir vuvia. Everyone's mixed together. Usually that's the way it is, right? You've seen that? Am I speaking the wrong language? You've seen that? Yeah, of course. Okay. Okay, so anoshim enoshim yachad tachas hachuppah al mesamchu. Uma shekasav mashinagu l'sader kiddushin tachas hachuppah makom anoshim enoshim sham yachad. V'lama lo chashshu kamo be'evel rachmana litzlan. He says, so why do people do that? And why don't they take concern, just like they do in a shiva house, to separate the men and the women? V'kol shekain hu makom simcha mi beis ha'evel. He says, and certainly, especially it's a place of joy, which leads to frivolity, potentially. Certainly more so than a shiva house. So why do they do it? So he says, Lefi aniyas daiti t'samchu b'zeh divrei halavush zal shekosav keven da'achshav kol kach regilam hanoshim bein hanoshim dami aleinu kekaki chivri v'lo mashkechinan behu. So remember, what was the svar of the lavush? He said today, the familiarity is like they're like white geese. You know, we don't look at them like women; we look at them like geese. You know, because we're so familiar with women passersby over the course of the day. And that's why we have the reason to be makel, to not make a strict separation between men and women when there's a chuppah. Aval masha shama b'shem gadol echad shamar hatam mishum delo havi rak ba'akrai ba'alma v'lochen lo asru. He says, but there's another gadol who is quoted as saying that since it's only b'derech akroi, it's only a happenstance gathering, that's the reason why you can be makel. He says, lo a'amin ki mi gadol shama kein. I don't believe that you ever heard this from a gadol say this, because it's not something a gadol would say. Devadi lo nira lechalek b'hachi, v'harei gam ber bismila asur le'isha shetikanes bein ha'anoshim. He says, because even at a bris, we don't allow a woman to come in where the men are. V'hasam nami lo havi ela akroi ba'alma, or going mamish. He says, like even when they say kvater, he says, we're makbid that the woman should not enter into the Beis HaKnesses all the way where the men are gathered. He says, why is that? Even though it's only for just a few moments where a woman would be bringing the baby in. The kamash et savchu rabosenu al zeh, uvedocha ki tiru lahakvaterin lahachnis hatino ki yadua. All we allow is the kvater to come in and just bring the baby in, but then they have to step out. Ibra diraisi mefurash barashi kiddushin. Pei Aleph, Ahash Amr B'Gemara, Abayat Dair Gilfi, Rava Dair Kana, Pirish Rashi, Gilfi Makam Kavutzas Anoshim V'Noshim, O Lidrasha, O Lechuppah, Hayamasadar Kankanim Shel Cheres Harbeshim, Yavo Zeh, Eitzel Zeh, Yikashkachu V'Yisham HaKol. Remember, we saw this Gemara from Kiddushin, that Avaya and Rava set up pieces of either bamboo or pottery when there was a public gathering for a shir or a chuppah between the men and the women, so sort of act like an alarm system, so that if anyone would try to walk over, they would make a sound. The pottery would clang, or the bamboo would make a sound, and that way they would remind themselves that they had to remain separate. Dair lashon dari megillah yudbei shuro shuros dair konim misader konim sheha over alein kolam nishma ad kan aresh kasav Rashi meforish the gam lechuppah hayu misaknim shlo yavo zeh etzel zeh v'dim lechuppah ledrashta ve'alkein deleka l'taima mishum akroi elanir lafiana anius daiti kamosha kasafti. He says, therefore, it's got nothing to do with it, whether it's done with regularity or whether it's done irregularly. The bottom line is that you must rely on the Lavush's argument that in the times of the Gemara and in earlier parts of the ancient and Middle Ages, because women were so much of a rarity in the public sphere, it was provocative to be together in a social gathering with a woman, even for a chuppah or even for a shir, even if it was done with irregularity. The only reason why we're makel today is because of the svara of the lavush, because we are so used to having women in the public sphere, it doesn't arouse anything within us. It's not considered provocative.
So he's challenging Rav Moshe.
It sounds like he's challenging Rav Moshe. But it could be he's only challenging him, right? He's challenging him, right? It could be even Lakula. He's challenging him. But it's not clear. It's very difficult to extrapolate how far he would challenge Rav Moshe. What would he say regarding, letting men daven in a base avel, when there are women present? Rav Moshe says it's because it's derech akroi. But it could be Rav Klein would say it's not. You don't have to rely on derech akroi. It's because they're like kaki chivri. That's like they're white geese, and so we don't have to worry about them.
It sounds like he's just coming to say, on this practice that we do, Pukazeh, he's trying to be Malamitzchus on the
Correct.
people. I don't think he's addressing a shiloh like Rav Moshe was. If he may answer the same thing. He's trying to say, just by the way, what are they soymech on?
Yeah.
So they soymech on the levush.
The somech on the levush. Right. Uve'emes chashafti dezahaysa tam harabonim shetiknu lasos nisuin beretz Ashkenaz bekama mekoymos v'veis hakneses bifnim. He says, I'm of the mind to argue to me, like he said later, to me, Malamid Schus, on those Rabbanim in Germany who changed the minhag and made the chuppah inside the shul, when in reality the minhag had previously been to make a chuppah under the stars outside. How did that minhag change? So we're not going to talk about the anthropology of that change in the minhag. But he says, I can be malambit schus on the fact that they changed it, even though the Chsam Sofer, the Yadua da Chsam Sofer, zal hirish neged amina gazeh, the kosav aleim uvnei yisrael yotzim biyad Ramah. The Chsam Sofer was very upset at this change of minhag. He felt that this was a haskalah dika thing to do, which is why even to this day you'll find that people, when they book a chasana here, some of the very frum will not make a wedding in the sanctuary, because of this Chasam Sofer. They say, no, it's a Haskalah Dika thing to make a wedding in a sanctuary, and therefore we want to do it under the stars. So that's why we have that skylight, right? So that we can satisfy that issue. And what does he mean, the Chasam Sofer? Uvnei Yisrael Yotzeim Biyad Ramah. It's a play on words. That's a pasuk in Parshas Bishalach that the Jewish people left with an upright hand, like a victory. But spell it word Ramah is Rav Moshe Isserlis in the Shulchan Aruch. And what does the Ramah say? So I have it for you in the footnote. In Even HaEzer, there's a Ramah who says in Siman Samach Aleph, Yesh omrim lasos hachupa tachas hashamayim, l'simin tov sheyehezarm kichoch ve'hashamayim. Very much germane to our Parsha. Parshas Lech Lecha, where God promised that his descendants would be like the stars in the sky. So the Ramah says that's why there's a minhag to make a chuppah underneath the stars, to act as a siman tov, right? So what taka is the limud schus on those who have chosen to make a chuppah inside a building, inside a beis hakneses? Umi she'ena rotza lishma v'lotzei sachutza chas v'sholom v'chulei. Ayin Shom, the Chasam Sofer is very sharp in his insistence that it had to be outside. V'chein anachnu talmideihem nogim ad hayom hazeh ve'ein l'shanos chas v'sholom. And we, the students of the Chasam Sofer, are very makpid to always make a chuppah outside. Avolahani rabbanan yesh lalamid schus aleihem sha'asu kein kedei shelo yikansu hanashim v'lo yisarvu ben hanashim. Uvebeis hakneses lo nichnasu nashim v'hayu nashim l'chud v'hanashim l'chud be'ezras nashim. Kein nira lafia anius daiti lalamid tam zuchus aleihem. He says, so my limud schus is, one benefit there is in making a wedding inside of a shul? There's no mingling between the genders. The men sit on one side, the women sit on the other side, and that's the benefit of making a chuppah inside where there's separate seating. Right? When you make a chuppah outside in the courtyard, everyone's gathered together, and maybe that's the limud schus, that these rabbanim were not doing it because of a haskalah dika reason, just to be part of the enlightenment, but rather they were doing it because they felt that this was more of a tsanua dika way of gathering people together.
He's giving the limud schus on then or now?
Then, how that minhag started.
Because I think the minute started, this was in Hungary with the status quo, and the hallmark of the shul, the Chasam Sofer, and all of them, they made takana that you can't even daven in a shul in which they had 7 items that they itemized that made it a mark of one of the reformed shuls, the status quo. And that one of them was a chuppah outside. But maybe today, there's a good limud chus. Because then, I mean, when the Chassam Sofer wrote on at that time, it was an absolute forbidden thing to make a.
Well, you know, it could be that he's not disagreeing that the Chassam Sofer back then was identifying that as a Haskalah Dika behavior. But to be Malamed Schus on even from Rabbanim who did that back then.
Like this is the same thing as the beam in the front. It was that same genre that came up.
I understand.
Those 7
Right. So I understand what you're saying, but the language itself certainly is a limud schus, both on why they did it back then, even from Rabbanim. Not that everyone was a reformist, but some of them did it l'shem shamayim. And even today also you can be malamid zuchus on them for the same reason. But avol vaday anachnu yotzim biyad ramach kfi shekosav achsam sofer zal b'tzorach lasos hachupa tachas kipas harakiyo lizborech mimaon habrachos. I don't know what that abbreviation is. He says Adkan Tosef. I'm not sure what that Ad Kedei something. I'm not sure what the abbreviation is. But he says the bottom line is that despite the limud schus, I still feel that you should make the chuppah under the stars. So that's why many people are makbid to do a chuppah under a skylight at the very least. Which, if you ask me, all right, I'm not going to get into the politics of it. But, a skylight that opens up a crack in the sky, I'm not sure what that does, but I guess if you're in Toronto and making a wedding in January, that's the most you could hope for, right? I mean, you're not going to get your guests to stand outside in the snow to have a siman tov.
Or in the rain.
Yeah, or in the rain. Yeah. Okay. What? What?
That's the meaning of the raincoat.
Oh, over the kittel? Are you serious?
I heard.
Winter coat.
A winter coat, really? Could be. I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, just I want to finish with this last thing, and that is that of course. So what we've seen now, we really don't have any definitive psak that in all situations you have to do X. You can always be machmir. So the most machmir that we saw was from the Sefer Chasidim that you have to have at a Sheva Brachas. You have to have men in one room, women in another room. And that's the only way that you can say Shahasimcha b'ma'ona. But as we know, that's not the minhag, not of our avosenu, and not even of avos avosenu. That doesn't seem to be the way people were knowing. In certain segments of the Jewish world, of the Orthodox world, that is the minhag, and we don't begrudge people from being machmir in that sense. We are somech today on the lavush, that because it is common for women to be part of the public sphere, it's not considered to be provocative. But of course, to what extent do we rely on that? That's extremely subjective. Extremely subjective. I will tell you this. I don't find, based on the Rav Moshe's tshuva, that at a beis chasana, which is for invited guests, you don't have to have separations, you don't have to have a mechitzah. It seems to be the same thing, that you don't need to have separate seating as well, because there's no such din of separate seating without mechitzah, at least not from Rav Moshe. It could be that there are others who would disagree. And what certainly doesn't make sense is to have a mechitzah for the dance floor, but then to have men come to the women's side and watch the women dancing, because that sort of defeats the purpose of the mechitzah. So anyway, so a lot of this has to be sort of common sense. You know what I'm saying? When I go to a wedding, I see my wife so rarely on an evening, I specifically request to be at a table to sit next to her so that I can converse with someone that I'm interested in talking to. I don't know about you, but whatever a person wishes to do. Some people actually prefer separate seating, because I heard that the origin of separate seating was that a woman turned to her husband and said, "Don't eat that." And he said, "Next wedding I'm going to, it's going to be separate seating." But anyway, I actually saw that, right? So I think I saw it, someone quoted on Facebook or something. But in any event, I just want to finish with this Mishnah that we are very familiar with in Maseches Tainis, at the end of Maseches Tainis, that says that Lo hayut yomim tovim liYisrael kechamisha asar ba'av u'chayom haKippurim. The happiest days for the Jewish people were Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. And Shebahen benos Yerushalayim yotzos b'chlei lavan shu'ulin shelo levayishis misha'ein lo. And the daughters of Israel would all go out in white dresses to go out to the, and they would go yotzos v'cholos b'kromim. The daughters of Jerusalem would go out and dance in the vineyards on the outskirts of the city. Uma hayu omros, what would they say? So the Mishnah says, Bachur, sa na einecho ure'ei ma'ata borer lach. Bachur, young man, lift up your eyes and see what you're going to choose for yourself. Al titein einecha b'noi, tein einecha b'mishpacha. And don't pay attention to beauty, think about the mishpacha. Now, of course, probably the more homely girls would say that. So the Gemara goes to a whole explanation as to which girls would say what, depending upon their beauty, depending upon the osher of the family, and depending upon the yichus, and whatever. Okay. The Kolbo, in source number 16, says, Uma hayu omros bachor sa einecha urei ma'ata borelach pirish shekol mi she'en lo isha nifnu l'sham. So the Kolbo says very explicitly, anyone who was single, any bacher, any bachelor who was single would go there. And va'omros lo al titein einecha biyofi tein einecha b'mishpacha. And they would say to him, don't pay attention to beauty, pay attention to the yichus. The yesh temeyin eich hayatov haminag hazeh be'enei hachachamim sheyachtafu ish es ishto. And many people are sort of aghast at this. How did the chachamim allow such a minhag that people should chap each other just on the spur of the moment, sort of like at a singles bar? V'chas v'sholem doma kilo hayu benos Yisrael hefker. And it almost seems like they're making the daughters of Israel as loose women. You know, sir, I'm available. Come, you want to go home with me? Fine. Ve'ein zatema. Ki yesh ladas shekol mi sheyado magas lahasi bita lo hayasholcho sham. So the Kolbo says, you have to realize and appreciate that if a person was from a wealthy family, you know, if the family had money, they would not send their daughter to go out dancing in the vineyards. She'im haisa ketana matoel chatifa sareina mikudeshes bilti das aviyav im haisa naro bogeres im choshesh lezelo yinichem alotzeis. He says no wealthy dad is going to let his daughter, no matter what her age, go out and start dancing in front of a bunch of yeshiva bachers. And even if she would go, he would tell her, listen, I want to meet the boy. Don't just let yourself get engaged to anyone who wants to marry you. So the Kolbo says, listen, this was a remedy to the shidduch crisis. This was the remedy to the shidduch crisis. You know what the remedy was? He says, listen, these girls are sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring, and the phone ain't ringing because they're not from wealthy homes, and there's not a whole line of guys waiting to marry them. And the language of the Kolbo is, he says, "V'ulai hayu yoshvos ashetal bin roshani malo al yedei haminhag hazeh." He says, who knows what would happen if we didn't do something? They'd have to sit home and wait till their hair goes gray without any shidduch prospects if we didn't institute some kind of minhag. So everyone's up in arms right about the shidduch crisis. It's very simple. Create a social gathering for young men and young women. All of those people who are up in arms, we can't do that. Look at what the Kolbo says. He says, listen, it's not maybe a lichatchila because you want to have people meet in a sort of a more private function, you know, a more maybe tsanua way, but what's the alternative?
Doesn't that go against everything Levush said? Like it's just sort of total opposite? Because in that time they didn't go out prominently.
The Kolbo is well before the Levush. The Kolbo is a Risha. I'm saying even in the times of the Middle Ages, when women were a rarity, even in the times of the Gemara, the Kolbo was saying that even if this would create problems of tznius, even if it created hirhurim, you can justify it if it's for the mitzvah of shidduchim. What? You got a shidduch crisis. What are you going to do for all of these single girls? You got to do something. Don't let them just sit at home waiting for the shadchan to come. You've got to be proactive. Okay, so that's the first thing. I saw an interesting, just a small mimer from a Rav Mordechai Rabinovich who passed away not too long ago. He was a Rosh Hashiva in Bnei Brak. And he quotes the Eitz Yosef, who the word I'm looking for is, he reinterprets the Gemara the Eitz Yosef, because it's so shocking that it would be okay for this to go and to read it in the normal way you read it. So he quotes the Eitz Yosef, and he says, Uma hayu omros, Rotzolomar bizimrein hayu omros kain. Lo sheyomru kain klape habachurim kizu pritzus gedol livnos Yisrael adkan lashana. So the Eitz Yosef says, when the Mishnah says that the daughters of Israel would say, Bachur, lift up your eyes and take a look, it doesn't mean that they would say that directly to the Bachurim. Those were the words of a song. Young men, lift up your eyes, and it said, young men, right? I guess that was the song, that was the origin of the song. But anyway, Adkan Lashona. So that's it was a song. It wasn't that they were calling them out, but it was the lines of a song, because God forbid, you think you're going to expect a Jewish girl to yell to a young man and say, take a look, give a kick, right? They wouldn't do that. So Rav Rabinovich wrote, he says, V'nira she'ein zu siba maspika lahotzi hadvar mi pashtusan. He says, it seems to me that that's not a sufficient argument to change the simple taich of the Gemara. ובפרט כיוון שהיו שם הבחורים, מה זה משנה אם הן כאילו מזמרוס לעצמן וממילא הכוונה לבחורים, או שהן פונות אל הבחורים, כי בכל מקרה יש פנייה לבחורים. He says, and the Eitz Yosef is really not making it very much better anyway. He says, even if they were saying it in lines of a song, it's clear that the intent is that the Bachrim should hear it and give them a good look over. Okay? V'im mitzad pritzus, halo kol ha'hanhaga azo shebenos Yisrael yotzos v'roktos lifnei ha'bachurim va'od hein omros bachur sana inecha ein basem mishum tznius b'lashon hamata. He says the whole protocol, it's an understatement to say that there's not a tznius aspect over here, right? It's clearly, this is a total breach of tznius protocol when you think about it. Ela hateretzu letzarach shiduchim osin kain. As gama piniyala habachurim letzor shiduchim v'nisuim v'hakol l'shem shamayim. He says, but what you see from here clearly is that it's for solving the shidduch crisis. You want to let boys and girls get married, so you temporarily forego the norms of tznius, of the separations of the genders, for the sake of the mitzvah of making shiduchim. It's plain and simple. Upashat shahanhaga zu shal benos Yerushalayim shayechet rak kishezeh lo mevi lidei michshol. He says, and clearly, this hanhaga, this practice, was only instituted with the rabbi's oversight in situations where they felt that there would be no setback or be no downfall. What's the word I'm looking for? Michshol. There would be no snare, stumbling block as a result of this practice. V'lo kol hadoro shavim, but you have to realize, not every generation is the same. V'az haya bazeh takana livnos Yerushalayim shelo hitzlichu lihishtadechu lihitchatein. This was done for girls who were older, and they hadn't yet found a shidduch. Maybe they were already 15 or 16. They were becoming an old maid, right? V'az lo hevi adav lidei michshol dim haya mevi al yedezeh eize michshol hayu mafsiken da hanhagazu. He says, obviously this did not bring a stumbling block and cause bad things to happen, because once it does, you have to put a stop to it. So I just want to conclude by saying, in other words, you can look at the rest of it yourself. But the point is that lo kol hazmanim shavim, not all times are the same, not all situations are the same. You can't make a rule for a community that the community is not going to accept, either l'chumra or l'kula. You have to use discretion. And the bottom line is that when it comes to mechitzahs in a Beis HaKnesses, that's halacha for davening. When it comes to mechitzahs for social events, that's not halacha. And it may be that there's a requirement for separate seating, according to Rav Moshe, if the public is invited and it's b'derech ragil, it's done regularly. But certainly if it's b'derech hakroi, you could argue that even separate seating is not required. Okay, we'll hold it here for